Martha Highfield, president of the Seattle office for Possible. We are thrilled to sponsor this session, and I'm so glad you showed up. Personally, this is a favorite of mine of just talking about technology and creativity. And a recent quote that I heard, which is, you inhale technology and exhale creatively. So without further ado, Rebecca, come on up.
No matter what order.
Go on the end.
Hello. Can you guys hear me? I have to kind of go like this. Well, welcome to Emerging Technology That Fuels Creativity. My name is Rebecca Faulkner, and I'm the head of Global Creative at StubHub, which is a technology leader in the ticketing and entertainment industry. I've had a lot of fun over the past few weeks getting to know our wonderful panelists here. And what we're going to be talking about today is how these women in advertising have used emerging technology to produce something novel for their clients. And many thanks to Possible for sponsoring this breakout session. So Danielle, can you tell us a little bit about the campaign for Saint Germain and the brief and how that all began?
How many of you have ever had Saint Germain? How many of you have ever used Periscope? Well, that's actually pretty good. As you guys probably know, Saint Germain is delicious. But it's an ingredient brand. It's one of those things that you kind of keep on your shelf like you would, I'm trying to think of a comparison, like Chambord, right? You break it out, maybe once or twice a year and push a little bit of it into a champagne glass. Well, Bacardi obviously realized that that was a problem, that not enough people were drinking Saint Germain, that it was considered this ingredient brand. And though bartenders call it the bartender's duct tape because it makes sort of every drink taste better, they had this issue, they had this problem. And the long-standing brand actually was aesthetically very beautiful. It had a long history of using deco art for the bottle. The bottle itself is absolutely beautiful. And they had these really cool old postcards from the 1920s era, Belle Epoque, Parisienne, very Moulin Rouge-esque brand styling, which we really, really loved. But it was kind of old and stodgy, and we really had to kind of figure out how are we going to take this brand and kind of move it to the future, but still stay true to a lot of the values and a lot of the great work that they had already done. So to move this from this ingredient brand to sort of a consumer play, we had to do something on a larger stage. And that started with us really pushing, when do you drink Saint Germain? So when do you guys drink Saint Germain? Like it's actually one of those great things that you could pitch against Bloody Marys, mimosas. It's a brunch drink. So we had to start with, let's carve out an occasion to make people understand when they're supposed to drink Saint Germain, and therefore they'll ultimately drink more of it. So we pushed off the nightlife and created this line, this beautiful strategy line and this positioning statement of Vive the Day Life. That there were these beautiful moments during the day that were missed because nightlife gets all the fun. So with that as sort of our overarching North Star, we really dug into, well, what's happening with consumers today? There's something called the acceleration age. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. Most of you have your phones in your hands, so you're a part of it, whether you know about it or not. But what I hate so much is brands saying, put down your phone. I just don't think people are going to do that. I think that's an unrealistic expectations that brands try to set for themselves. To tell people in the acceleration age, back off from your technology, is just not something I think, it's not behavior we're going to change. So we had kind of all these things swirling in our head, and we thought, well, how can we put technology at the forefront, but actually become a brand that was saying, pick up your phone, use technology to bring you those beautiful moments during the day that you would otherwise miss because of your busy lifestyle. So with Vive the Day Life as our North Star, and this technology idea that we kind of had circling in our heads of knowing who we were dealing with in terms of audience, we come up with this notion to leverage that old Belle Epoque era and think about a peep show. What would a peep show look like in today's era? And what influences could we have over the art direction, the style, and actually spin it to be more empowering than it was about sort of the negative connotations that go with the peep show. And we thought, well, let's make it live. What would that be like? And to be honest, the first iteration of the idea was on Snapchat. We thought, let's Snapchat a peep show. How cool would that be? That it's this fleeting moment that disappears. That the platform is inherently created to disappear. And how cool was that? That if you didn't stop and slow down and pick up your phone and notice at the right moment, you were gonna miss it, which was perfectly in line with our strategy. And we knew that we weren't just using the platform for gratuitous reasons, we were actually using it because it was inherently aligned to our strategic positioning. Well, it turns out Snapchat is age-gated, and there were all kinds of logistics involved with being able to deliver the execution via Snapchat, and the idea died. And we just all thought, okay, one of those things that you love, that you have a lot of heart for, that's on the cutting room floor. And then lo and behold, Periscope came out. And that in there lies the birth of our peep show execution.
That's great. I think let's take a look at the making of the campaign to give people a better flavor of what we're talking about.
Mes pluies. Plus beau que le type du troisième qui m'envoyait ses je t'aime. J'étais au bord de la crise. Alors me suis laissé aller dans les cieux, dans ses yeux. Départ sous une tasse de thé, à la terrasse du grand café, dans le regard non identifié d'un type sorti comme ça, d'un vrai conte de fées. Il est tombé là dans ma vie, un peu vite comme un ovni, avant que je ne réalise ma...
So aesthetically, it's a gorgeous campaign. It's, especially impressive that your team created this live. So maybe can you talk a little bit about just the tactics of production for a live performance like that?
Yeah, it was scary as hell. We just didn't know what was going to happen, and we had prepared for the worst. For starters, we knew we had a subject matter that presented to the community. Who knew how people would react? So we had a whole social media team ready to pounce on wrangling that communication and sort of steering it in the right direction should we get any backlash. And then there was the whole notion of, what do we shoot on? What director is going to want to shoot on an iPhone? Or, as it were, that was ultimately the technology that worked the best. But who's going to want to shoot on a phone? How does that work? What if she has a wardrobe malfunction? We had just had a litany of things to really take into consideration, but ultimately, what we felt like was so powerful was this idea that, how many of you guys ever sat in an audience and at a Pearl Jam concert and been like, Eddie Vedder was singing just to me. We had this moment, and we knew that we could create that with Hannah and the audience if we did it the right way. So she actually had an earpiece in, and we were prepared to be able to say things to her while she was performing. And what actually happenstance was the community loved it. They supported it. There was no trolls. There was nobody upset about the content. But what they didn't believe was that it was live. Which we're in the studio like, what the hell? This is Periscope. Like, how could this not be live? Do they think we're shooting a video? Like, what do they think we're filming? But we had the power of that earpiece, so we could say, hey, Floria, the comments are that people don't believe it's live, and she would get on her mic and be like, hey, Hannah, wink at me. And so if the comments were, hey, Hannah, wink at the camera, we could say, hey, Hannah, wink at the camera. And she would wink and create that sort of Eddie Vedder moment with the audience real time.
It's incredible. And I know you mentioned you had a war room of sorts. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, half the war room people are here. We had to figure out how we were going to create content live in the moment. I mean, this is the craziest thing ever because usually you go on these shoots, right? And then you're in the edit bay for like 3 weeks. So it's bizarre because it was done at the end of the day, right? It's live. It still kind of blows my mind. But we had to figure out how to capture content from the day while we were shooting it. So we had the team of creatives in the room with Floria directing Hannah. But then we had a whole other team in another room managing the social media aspect of it. So we had a still shooter and a videographer literally run, as soon as the live stream was over, run out, hand us their SD cards. We uploaded them to computers. We looked at the stills, we looked at the video. We had an editor on site. He would turn a short piece of video out in, I think our record time was 6 minutes. Mm-hmm. We got client approval, talent approval, wrote the tweet, figured out whether it was dark promoted or whether there was a shit ton of media behind it, figured out which channel it was going to go best in, and pushed it out live, all real time. So we had 47 minutes roughly between each episode to make that happen. So it was an extraordinary feat.
Yeah. So in terms of choosing your production team and staffing it, how did both gender and the personalities of the crew come into play?
You know, at the agency side, we really had to consider that, we were doing a live, essentially a live show with a scantily clad woman. And we chose the creative team based on their aesthetic and their ability to deal with new technologies, first and foremost, but those two creatives happen to be women. Mm-hmm. And then it just sort of sparked our imagination about, the client is gonna believe us more, they're gonna trust us more if this campaign is coming from women, because they know we're not gonna cross a line. Mm-hmm. And that led us to, well, then we have to have a female director. This just makes sense to have a female director. When we met Floria, who was amazing, I mean, the woman is like otherworldly, she really understood our not only our concept, but how to make this more of an empowering piece than anything that could, go the wrong way. And her production company, led by Liz Silver, were the right fit. And it was bizarre because we'd be on these pre-pro calls looking around like, we're all women, which never happens. I mean, it's unheard of to have 3 agency creative directors, much less a female director and a female production company in one room making this piece. So.
And how do you think the notion of voyeurism ties into the gender of the staff and the director?
It was really important to us, especially preparing for that live aspect. We all have this debate about are there brands that only women should work on? Are there brands that only men should work on? And I always have said no. As a writer, I know how to write like a plumber. I mean, you should be able to not know that I am a woman when you read something that I've written. But today, it's different because you're involved in the community and you have to answer on the dime something and sound authentic. So if I am in the background researching about football, but I don't really know about football, and then something happens in the community and I can't answer authentically right away, that's troubling. So with this particular piece, we had to make sure that the team understood how to think like a woman on a dime. What would Hannah do in a real-time situation and what wouldn't she do in a real-time situation meant the difference between this feeling really authentic or, ultimately like a man was behind the scenes, which we really didn't want to happen.
And with that 6-minute turnaround time that you mentioned, I imagine there was no room for egos.
No, actually the editor was a guy, but he was actually from ESPN. So he was like really good at replay. He had edited replays, so he was so super fast in the edit room. But no, I mean it was a tremendous hold hands and jump kind of a moment, and from everything from choosing Periscope to figuring out how to get the technology to work meant people who were willing to ask questions. And I'm certainly not suggesting that men can't do that, but I am suggesting that the creative talent that we put against this were the kind of people to stop and ask for directions. And certainly there are men who can do that, but in this case, the women were the right people for the job.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about the results of the campaign?
Yeah, our agency is very mired in data. We come from a very heavy analytics shop that we've incorporated into everything that we do from strategy to creative. So it was really important to us that we didn't just make a beautiful campaign, that we did something that actually moved the client's business. And we set out to reach, I think it was, I don't have the results in front of me, but we ended up reaching 2x our goal. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that we measured was content velocity. So content velocity essentially is a buzzword that Facebook and Twitter and all those platforms like to use lately, which means it's one thing to talk to your audience, it's another thing to reach more than the people that you're already talking to. So we reached actually 6x the people that we already had in our channels, wow. Which was a true testament to that live content that we were creating on the fly, and those replay links of Periscope really being the key to unleashing an audience that we hadn't reached before, mm-hmm. which was essentially what our charge was. It's hard to get that data, but we certainly could see the comments that we were getting live, and it was about 50-50, yeah.
Wow. It's such an incredibly unique campaign. Would you encourage anyone to do something similar with Periscope or a similar technology?
I like to think that we sort of set the bar for what Periscope can be. Nobody had ever seen a campaign like that on Periscope, and I think I'd like to think that anything that is done after this is going to be reminiscent of the way that we skewed the technology and the way that we leveraged it. And I think, I said it before, but it's not just about using technology because it's there. It's about using technology because it makes sense strategically to your concept. And in this case, I just think we knocked it out of the park, if I don't say so myself.
When you think back around maybe the tactics of production, is there anything you would have changed?
No. I don't know if any of you have planned weddings. It's a room full of women, but you have that moment where you're like, I can't believe nothing went wrong. That's kind of how the day was. On set, it was so beautiful and masterfully crafted. It was like a Wes Anderson set. It was so amazing. And then the fact that by episode 3-ish, we were like, we're really doing this, and nothing's happened, and nobody's slamming us on social media was unheard of. We all kind of just were in disbelief.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and move on to Chloe, and we're going to actually, can you just tell us a little bit about Love Has No Labels?
Yeah, I think it's interesting seeing your work, and it's such great work. And I think a theme that's really nice that's threading maybe all the work together today is this idea that there's an interesting place where stories and technology meet. And I think what's interesting in your work, it really fits into someone's life and is, in a way, a great utility, but branded and kind of named in a really fun way. And you actually were finding a way to stand out and tell an interesting story that would get people's attention. So if you're talking about design and technology, I think we definitely take inspiration from technology, but it's a space where the story and the system or design and technology along with the story intersect that I get really excited. And what we've been doing at RGA for the last few years is really trying to make sure that our storytellers are as strong as our designers. And our background, our DNA is very much in design and technology. It's the air we breathe. We don't have a 10% program. It's required of people there to be surrounded by it or be best friends with technologists and constantly be exposed to what's possible. But it doesn't make sense if it's not related to a brand truth or to an interesting human story that we can tell. So the two pieces of work that you're going to see today, one is Love Has No Labels, which is really more of a social media campaign, and the other is for Equinox, which is a connected cycling experience. And I think you can't do any of this work without brave clients. And the exciting thing, I don't know about your clients in this case, but our Equinox team is actually in the room. Erin and Colleen are in the back. Sarah Robb O'Hagan is a warrior at Equinox. She's an amazing client, very brave. The women that lead ad council for Love Has No Labels have a ton of courage. So if you have clients like that and they're willing to go there with you, you can do really amazing work. So I know today's conference is really about powered by brands. So for all those clients in the room, thank you for taking risks. Love Has No Labels was really focused on this idea of unconscious bias, which is very topical in this room today, that as much as we think we're modern and beyond racism and sexism and that we live in this kind of race, age. We actually all have implicit bias that shapes how we view the world, how we curate teams, how we pick our talent, how we make decisions every day at work, especially in this industry, and we're just not conscious of it. So we really challenge the team, how do we tell a story that will get people just to stop and think? And that's what led to Love Has No Labels, and I think it is probably the most viewed PSA that Ad Council ever did, one of the most viewed PSAs in history, aside from Dumb Ways to Die. Dumb Ways to Die. I think, and that was just a really good song, but Dumb Ways to Die was great. I don't knock it. And the creatives had worked their whole careers before they came out with that hit, so God bless them. But so you have Dumb Ways to Die, and then you have Love Has No Labels. But Love Has No Labels, it's special because it happened one day in California for 30 minutes, and it's still reverberating in the world. So it's really interesting to think. It's kind of the opposite. You guys made something that kind of disappeared. This is still traveling, and it's still having an impact, and we're going to be working on a new version of it for the next, I think, Valentine's Day. In the case of Equinox, I think the gym was seeing a proliferation of small studios that are kind of eating their lunch in their focus on cycling, like SoulCycle and Flywheel. And so they really wanted RGA to leverage our understanding of how data can motivate people. We did a lot of work with Nike Plus over the last almost decade to see how data can actually be a source of inspiration when you understand your fitness behavior. And what we did with Equinox Connected Cycling is we actually see how can data inspire a whole room of people. So it was really interesting to take the data from the individual experience and apply it to a group experience. So those are the two pieces of work you'll see.
Great. So I'm warning you, you may need to grab some Kleenex.
The Pursuit by Equinox, the world's best connected studio cycling experience that tracks every moment, pits rider against rider, team against team, and motivates people by seeing their data in real time. The Pursuit consists of 3 parts. There's the instructor console, which tracks the progress of every rider, the immersive widescreen experience, and a second screen experience that lives on a rider's phone. Your every move is animated on screen, with performance-based games created with exercise science-driven data. The Pursuit is functional, beautiful, and it makes you work harder than you've ever worked before. This is The Pursuit by Equinox.
So how would you say the Pursuit changed the cycling experience for Equinox
You
members?
can't hide in the corner. Your data is on the wall and you're part of a team. It's a certain accountability and an extra layer of motivation. I think for anyone that works out in a gym, it can get really boring to be on a treadmill or be in a cycling studio. So this kind of takes you out of the room you're in and really connects you to the people in the room, and you can see that, how you're progressing, and then there's a sense of teamwork. But there was a whole methodology behind the games. We worked with a whole team of instructors at Equinox to really look at what's the spine of a class, what's kind of the beginning and middle and end, and how do you really tell a story with the data. So all the visualizations are designed to kind of bring people into the right moment that they're in, but then push them a little farther than they're normally used to. And it's really interesting to see how that can actually help them get faster, help them get stronger. And it's been really successful. I think they've rolled it out now across the country. Mm-hmm. And I guess the challenge now is like looking to do new games, looking to do some new experiences to keep it fresh for people.
That's great. Let's talk about shiny object syndrome, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with. Just this idea of hopping on the bandwagon of whatever the newest emerging tech is, the newest platform, and maybe it's not always what's right for your client, maybe it is. How do you contend with that?
I think it's always about calibrating the technology with the customer and the brand. And as long as you're finding a truth about the brand that intersects with the truth about people and the new technology, you will probably be in a good space. I think if you're just doing something because virtual reality is the new thing and you're not really thinking about why is that right for the brand or how does that either inspire someone or help someone, it can be kind of a throwaway.
Right.
One of the things that I think is always really interesting that I see is that you can almost approach it from two different ways. But if you start with the idea, then typically at least my own thought process, you start with the idea and then you look at the platforms or the technologies that already exist and you think about, well, can I leverage them? Or can I use them in a way that no one's used them before? I mean, we see it happen all the time where Instagram all of a sudden is hosting menus for restaurants just because they have enough food pics that they can aggregate on Instagram to basically create a menu. It's a really neat way of using Instagram, right? Maybe you don't need to build something, but I think certainly with RGA, if it's about the idea, the technology or the platform doesn't exist, then you build something. And that's when you truly know that you're not just leveraging something because it's there.
I'll create some controversy. Sometimes I think it's actually the opposite, which is a very tech-first brainstorming approach. Sure. I mean, it totally works if you have an idea, but I get really excited by your example of a new Facebook ad targeting technology. I think that's actually a great brief. We have this new technology on Facebook where you can actually serve ads to a friend, and then you take a brand like Nike or Beats plus holiday, and there's your brief. It's a tech-first brainstorm. It's based on a new innovation, a brand, and a moment in time. That, to me, is like the perfect brief. I think it's got enough constraints that it can get really rich.
Yep, and the same thing with the leverage, like looking at the platforms and using them in ways that have never been used before.
But if you had started with Periscope, you could have potentially gotten to the...
We did, actually, when we started with Snapchat. We actually started, that's actually a really interesting point, because when we met with Bacardi, we actually had our chief strategy officer give them a presentation that was all about emerging trends, and then went into the brainstorm. So it wasn't actually Periscope or Snapchat that influenced that specific idea, but the conversation started there of, this is what's out there, this is what's happening. Bottom up, top down, I think there's two ways of going at it.
And how do you deal with client trepidation around new technology?
How did you sell through that campaign? I mean, it's a pretty spicy idea. It's an edgy idea. It's a new platform.
Well, I mean, I think it started with, it wasn't someplace they'd never been. I mean, they had this sort of history in this Belle Epoque era. They had, I mean, while the women in the 1920s weren't as scantily clad as Hannah Simone was, we knew that it wasn't off limits. And then I think it did come down to, we have a direct relationship with the CEO at Bacardi, which helps a lot. We have a positioning that we believe that the CEO is the digital agency's job, and that's our client, and that's important, especially in this case. That we had the full support all the way up to Mike Dolan was really important in this case, but also fucking brave clients, women on the client side as well, and I actually felt guilty not mentioning them prior. It was not only with the female team, creative team, female directors, female clients. So they understood and really worked hard to understand what our intentions were. And together we approached, what's the line? What should she be wearing? No, that's too nightlife. That's too risque. That's better. What kinds of things do we want her to do? And ultimately we all agreed on this notion that Hannah showed us only what Hannah wanted us to see. And that was really empowering. And we all just sort of knew that. So the answer is I don't know. But we did.
Amazing, yeah.
So you're staying on top of the latest technology to serve your clients. How about in your private lives? How do you organize your life as a spouse?
Can I give the behind the scenes what happened at lunch? Okay. So we met at lunch and we were talking, and Rebecca asked me, is there anything you don't want to talk about? And I said, well, I really don't want to talk about work-life balance. And then I said, I just want to talk about the work. This panel should just be about the work. And then I started to think about how outside of my job, how much I rely on and love technology to help me as a working mom. So I thought if we talk about work-life balance through the lens of technology, maybe it could be really interesting. And I am a self-proclaimed life hacker, and I'm constantly trying out new services that are enabled by technology, like the Whole Life Challenge I'm doing now, like this Calm app, and all these things help me with my, peace, to be able to deal with the stress of my job and my two crazy kids. But then also just to have more time with my family, I fully rely on things like Uber, and not just Uber driving, but Uber Eats now, and Fresh Direct, and lighter culture, and a million things. And in that way, I'm very much a tech optimist in that I love technology when it can make a small difference in my life that gives me back time to spend with my family or my friends. And I feel like time today is actually the ultimate, more than money, more than fame, more than anything. It's like time, that unit of time means more to me than anything. So in that way, I do think that all the startups and innovators that are just going in and taking out little pain points and making our lives easier, they mean the world to me. And if I had more time, that's what I would be doing, is designing things like a meditation app, like Yoga Glow. I love Yoga Glow. YogaGlow.com is the best. Anyway.
Yeah, at StubHub, we are often talking about how time and live experience is really the ultimate currency these days, rather than objects. So that makes a lot of sense. Danielle and Laura, how about you? What technology are you using in your personal lives?
The biggest one, I was telling the ladies on the panel, that the biggest one we do is Google Calendar, and not just because I can stay in touch. My husband also works, so not just because I can stay in touch with him, but anybody can then be invited to that calendar. So our family knows when we're traveling, our nanny knows when we're going to be late from work, and it's kind of like the central hub of making our family work so that we don't leave a kid at school.
Have you ever done that?
No.
So I think we have time for a couple questions from the audience. Looks like we have one hand over here.
This question is for Danielle. Can you talk a little bit about your production budgets and how you talk to the client about that? And if you come at it from, or if they come at it from a social budget perspective, or if you kind of start from scratch?
It was their all-up marketing budget. And then we had, Vive the Day Life was actually the holistic campaign, and Peep Show was one of the activations in the campaign. We actually did another really cool integration with Uber called Bike Tender, where we delivered drinks to your door via Bike Tender through the Uber app, which is for another day. But that holistic activation, all 4 of the activations within the campaign were their whole marketing budget for the year. So it was not, they didn't get money from any other resource other than their FY15 plan or 14 plan.
Helene had a question.
What was the technology behind the...
It's like a motion tracking sensor or something, I don't know. I don't think the technology in Love Has No Labels is like the key experience. There was an interesting technology that allowed us to track where the bodies were behind the screen with the camera. But I think the real story there is more about the emotion of it and how it traveled through social media to have such an impact on people. Yeah.
Well, I think that's actually all we have time for. We've hit time. Thank you again to Possible for sponsoring this session. And thank you to Laura, Danielle, and Chloe.
Rebecca.